Hello, this is Adrian Shepard with Springtime Nations, and I'm here with my friend Kelbing, and we're here to do something a little different today. Normally, we're talking about either theoretical, ideological questions pertaining to anarchism, libertarianism, or we're talking about historical events, current events relating to secession and libertarianism. But today, I want to talk about the role that these ideas have to play in media, specifically three great and well-loved science fiction shows. Firefly, I think it aired in 2003. It's the oldest of these shows. The Expanse. Kelvin, when did The Expanse first air?
I believe it was around 2015 on the Sci-Fi Network.
Yes, I remember seeing that. I didn't actually know that it didn't originally air on Prime, although that's where I watched it. And then we have Andor, which came out this year or this last year. So all three of these, I think, are worth talking about because the first two, Firefly and The Expanse, relate to secession, as well as other libertarian themes throughout. And Andor, I think, has a really good lesson about Leninism that libertarians could gain some insight from, in the same way that we try to spread the understanding of Leninism that Rothbard had in his essay towards a libertarian strategy for social change. Let's start with the fact that these are all three science fiction shows. Science fiction is fairly popular these days. I mean, it's basically been popular since the 1930s in popular culture. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was very prominent to have libertarian themes being used for science fiction plots. You have to start with Ayn Rand's Anthem. You have Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. You have Probability Broach. You have Alongside Night. There's even an award that is awarded to people who, in the science fiction community, who write works that are inspired by belief in individual freedom. Not all of the recipients of the awards are libertarian, but it was founded by libertarians to promote libertarian ideas. The Prometheus Award has awarded things like George Orwell, but also you got Heinlein, you got Schulman, you got Terry Goodkind of the Sword of Truth series has been awarded many times, and he's an objectivist libertarian. So there's this long tradition of libertarianism being prominent in science fiction, but it seems like that's sort of been drowned out in the last couple decades. And Kelbing, just out of curiosity, if you have any ideas why that might be the case.
Well, I think it's a societal shifts in attitude. It goes back to that sort of 4-part cycle of civilization that's become kind of a meme, right? Where I think we just got through where the good times make weak men, and now we're seeing that the weak men make hard times, right? And so just sort of that society as a whole really becoming enamored by these progressive ideas, which is certainly like facilitated, right, by the when you increase the technological capability. It's a pretty convenient narrative device, I want to say. It's going to lend itself very well to a world of this type of hyperbolized political paternalism that we're seeing. A lot of actually The Expanse, the people who stayed on Earth as residents have this sort of global program, essentially, of being on welfare, for lack of a better term. It's all their like basic survival needs are taken care of, and there's like immense societal stagnation that we see. And I think that just sort of a practice of self-indulgence in a way that you're building a world where there's like a de facto post-scarcity, and it's kind of like a luxurious idea to kind of put yourself into.
I mean, I think that's a great way to delve into this, because all three of these series, but especially the two series that focus on secession, there's the idea of, to use a kind of Marxist terminology, you have the metropole, you have very wealthy, well-connected, and militarily powerful central government, and then you have the periphery, which are the in our historical case, it would be something like the island of Great Britain is the metropole, and the periphery would be the empire, right? You in Firefly, you have the core worlds and then the frontier planets. The frontier planets are providing resources to give to the core, right? They're being exploited, you might say. I mean, the way they're exploited isn't from the Marxist perspective of merely they're trading. From a libertarian perspective, we would understand that trade would be mutually beneficial, but if it's coerced trade, then what one party would be living at the expense of the other. So this is going on Firefly with Core World and the Frontier, and it's going on in the Expanse with Earth, and to a certain extent also Mars, and they're living, especially Earth is living this like kind of post-scarcity lifestyle, but it's subsidized by basically the legal and economic oppression of the belters, right? The people
Yes.
who live on moons and large asteroids in the asteroid belt, extracting resources to deliver to the metropole.
Yep. That is the gist of it, I would say.
So, and of course, Firefly is set in a setting where this was a reason for the exploited party to try to secede. And in the Expanse, of course, it's not just the setting; it's the main plot. The Belters fight for freedom.
Yeah.
What would you say is? Do you think that's one, a compelling argument for libertarians, the kind of arguments that for a brown coat in Firefly or a belter in the Expanse would make? One, do you think that holds up on libertarian grounds? And two, and maybe this is the more important question, because I feel like there's a very straightforward answer to the first one and not necessarily to this coming one. Do you think the average viewer of these shows is convinced by those arguments for secession, for breaking away from like a unified human government?
Right. Yeah. So the answer to the first question, I would say, is yeah, pretty much all of the reasons, the grievances, if you will, of the brown coats and as well as the belters are very, very justified. And as a viewer, I suppose you would really sympathize um with the people and the struggles that are being portrayed. Like there was this one scene where one of the belters was saying, "Oh, they'll withhold the water rations and the air rations to force us into compliance," and that is something that we really don't have to obviously deal with in our society. But of course, that would be an extreme situation that a reasonable person would see as unacceptable. But I just think that it's not really going to say like inspire your average viewer, unfortunately, to really apply that sort of idea or ideology into like their own situations. And I think a lot of that has to do with their sort of complacency as your average American, and just being comfortable in a and fed this narrative, right, that they are the good guys. Like, you have, I don't remember his name, but that one head prosecutor in the Rittenhouse case showed up with like a rebel lapel pin, like from the rebels
Yes.
in Star
Oh man,
Wars.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, like that's just the level of sort
Yeah,
of
you're the
delusion.
rebel, man. You're a state prosecutor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's going to be a tough obstacle for our cause to really overcome.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, as sympathetic as these people, as viewers will emotionally find these characters, when you try to apply it to the real world, you get pushback. And I think a good way to think about this is ultimately, I mean, most of the viewers will be from the West, and an even greater subset of that, a plurality, is going to be Americans. And America presides over a global empire where they are the beneficiaries of coercive economic extraction. And to a certain extent, we are Earth, right? We are the core world. We're the metropole.
Mm-hmm.
So when people start talking about breaking up the metropole or someone breaking off from it and asking us to leave them alone, um, there is kind of a self-interest that kicks in for people. Like, no, 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 no. Alaska is not going to be. No, 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 no. New Hampshire is not going to be independent. Alaska, Puerto Rico, even. Although, well, that's a complicated question. We don't have to go down that road, because what we're really talking about is going to be like what people's reactions are to say, like, okay, the browncoats were good in Firefly, and they'll be like, yeah, of course, yeah, they're the good guys. They're doing what's right. Or, okay, so if someone seceded from America, would that be good? And then they'd be because it's hard. Like, if America was much smaller than it is now, there would be consequences. We may have a lower standard of living. It's harder for people to swallow that. We may be less secure. If Alaska was an American, for example, that would have implications for our national security, right? Alaska is right on Russia's doorstep. There's no American property anywhere else that's close to the Bering Strait. It would change things. You could obviously see arguments like that being made from the perspective of a citizen of the core world, or Earth and Mars, about the Belters. It's like, how are we going to secure a society? How are we going to live at their same standard of living? And yeah, that is always a challenge. And what Springtime of Nations, one of our major projects, is to cover historical secessionist movements in other countries where there isn't that immediate emotional investment from the person of defending the big country, right? Like, people they won't be thinking about maintaining Nigeria's national security or its economic position, because they're not Nigerian, right? So when you say, oh, well, should Biafra secede from Nigeria, and here are the reasons why, and Nigeria has been oppressive to the Igbo people, they'll be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But even something like Native American secession will get this instant pushback, even though, for all the progressive ideas that these people claim to hold about we shouldn't have even come to America. There's all this guilt about killing them, but it's like, okay, should they be their own country? No, because they're not smart enough to get by on their own. We need to take care of them. Yeah, the problem is, I would have to agree with your assessment that basically it's not doing enough of a good job to to push people to support secession in their own country, which is unfortunate.
Well, that's a good point to bring up because I think in all of these three works of fiction that they do a really good job of world building and characterization and really just getting across the struggle that they're part of. And so I'm left to question, like, if this is not good enough of a job, then like what is? And I don't have the answer to that, but that's something that might be worth thinking about.
Yes, there are definitely other ways and other situations where secession might become more palatable, but I believe to a certain extent it's out of the control of simply watching something happen on screen and kind of engaging with it as a viewer. I think ultimately these things for the American Empire to end, for any empire, the Russian Empire, the Chinese Empire, any imperialist power in the world today, even as small as like Moroccan imperialism in Africa, for that to end, there will have to be pain given to the people in power and damage inflicted on their means of holding power, which I think is a good way to segue into Andor, the third one, which we haven't discussed to too much length yet. So Andor, in many ways, the universe of Andor, which is the early days of the rebellion against the Galactic Empire and the basically the huge monolith of sci-fi culture, Star Wars, and maybe basic. I would say, having watched it, I finished it like a week ago, and that's why I was like bugging you, like, "Oh, we should do our episode on this." I think it might be the best thing ever made about Star Wars.
Interesting.
It-
Certainly from a libertarian standpoint,
sure, but
undoubtedly.
yes, but even I think it has the smartest characters so far of any Star. I mean, you have like the Imperials given kind of like they get their say too in like, this is why we need to, like, I feel like that's often missing from Star Wars is
Yes.
the Imperials can be bad, but the Imperials don't have to be like, I'm an evil Sith and I'm doing this because I love evil. It's like they're in power, they're extracting resources. The other people aren't in power, so they're the ones getting the shaft. And it's the cold logic of power. And that's not always articulated. I mean, I guess Grand Moff Tarkin, in a way, even in the first movie, he was kind of like the non-Sith protagonist in the first movie. It really isn't a replacement for him in the next two movies of the main series. But he's basically saying, we need to crush the rebellion because we hold power, and I want to be in power, and I love power. Like, it's a pretty understandable perspective if you understand like human history, right? He's trying to protect his empire.
Yeah.
But back to the universe of Andor, right? The Galactic Empire has been established. The Clone Wars are over. The remnants have been mopped up mostly. I mean, some are like in hiding, some are whatever. Separatists are still kind of fighting, but the Republic has been completely supplanted by the Empire. The Empire controls basically all of known space. And as in the other two series, you have a metropole, the core worlds, and you have the outer rim. And the protagonist, Cassian Andor, his home is basically And it's very funny and very important to realize this fact. The exploitation of his homeworld and its eventual basically destruction is not initiated by the evil empire, right? It's initiated by a republic craft. The republic did it. So it's that sets up this idea that it's not about someone who wants to replace the bad guys in charge in a giant galaxy-wide empire, republic, whatever. He doesn't just want to kick out the bad guys, putting good guys in charge of everything, right? It's someone who has experience with when even the good guys will set up this system where there's the exploited and the exploiter.
Certainly. And just actually going back a little bit, I did also appreciate how we got really an inside look of the ISB and really showing the motivations of these characters and letting us understand the life of a person working within the empire, like directly with Dedra, or even and more of a imperial aligned, but not necessarily inside of the system with Karn.
Right, Karn's a great character because and the corporate security, I think, it's funny, there are people. I was talking to someone and I was like, "Oh, you should watch Andor. It's great libertarian propaganda." And he's like,
Mm.
"I keep hearing communists saying it's good." And I think a communist could get a lot out of Andor for sure. I think ultimately, I mean, it's not ultimately about Marxism versus libertarianism. What it is about is rising up against trying to build a coalition to attack like an empire. And many different ideologies have been used to do that. But I do think, yeah, Karn's character, because he's starts off in corporate security, right? It's basic, and you could have like this Marxist. Oh, the corporations, private property is the running dogs for imperialism, right? Like corporate security on that planet. I'm trying to remember the one that Andor was part, like the port city or the port.
Like a Morlana, I think.
Yeah. So it was initially, it was kind of like a vassal state. Imperials did not have a physical presence there, right? They were expected to keep the peace, and in exchange, they would have a little autonomy to do things as they saw fit.
Right.
And yeah, Karn is kind of just like, yeah, he's a vassal of the empire. He's not of the empire. I mean, he tries to be, and he starts from the bottom and gets kicked out, and but he's still like, he has like, I think a great way to think about Karn is he's like a law and order conservative. He thinks that without the empire, people would just be murdering each other in the streets, and corporate security, and by extension, the empire is that thin blue line between, civilization and barbarism. And he's proud to be part of that thin blue line.
Yeah.
And he never loses that conviction, even after all of that. Like, he's a true believer in that. He's not in it. Like, Deirdre is like, maybe she believes, maybe in an intellectual level, the empire is better than what it replaced and what could replace it. But she wants to make her mark on history. Karn is like a total loyal like drone. He would love to like sacrifice his life for the empire.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard of this. I actually only very recently found out, but they are planning to make a second season of Andor at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think it's going to be about a year now, it's killing me because I just finished the first season. I wish I could go right back in.
Yeah, and I'm willing to bet that we'll see more of that dynamic of these two.
Of course, yes, especially because I mean, I'll definitely put spoiler alerts for all of this stuff, but especially because Karn saved Deirdre, basically.
Yes. Yes.
The world of Andor. There's that metropole periphery dynamic. There's people who they have their whole planets are basically depopulated, made uninhabitable. It's funny. In Firefly, Mal's homeworld is also basically destroyed by the bombing of the core worlds. The Planet Alliance basically bombs it to being uninhabitable, and that's very similar to the Cassian Anders story. But they're either extracted to that point, or their labor and material resources are exploited in other ways by the Empire. You got that planet, the heist is taking place on. They're basically causing the erosion of tradition, and the Empire does not like the fact that I believe they're humans even, but the fact that they're kind of traditional pastoralists. Empire has no time for that. Empire wants them to assimilate into the cosmopolitan imperial culture. They want them to go on watch like hologram porn, etc.
Yeah, they're basically the space Native Americans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, getting rid of indigenous traditions, religions, ways of dress, all that. All that needs to be assimilated in a great imperial plan.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy who was a rebel in like the early days, right when the Empire was kind of taking power, he took up arms, quickly defeated, kind of just wants to do his own thing, but he ends up mixed up in something, and he's thrown into a plan for a huge heist. On basically, I also think this is a brilliant touch. It's stealing the payroll of the Imperial Guards. So whatever, all Imperial employees in the sector.
Yep.
And I think that is too smart for George Lucas. When George Lucas thinks of the Rebel Alliance and crippling the Empire, it's like, oh, big space station, blow up the space station. It's like, if you starve an enemy, if you take out their ability to get food or pay or water or whatever, right? That's so much. I mean, that's some Sun Tzu shit.
Mm-hmm.
That heist is great for many reasons, but I think one of the great reasons is you have these different people coming together for different reasons to take down the Empire, and their leader basically needs to maintain cohesion within the group to get the job done. You have this very idealist guy. He's written a manifesto. I mean, the manifesto is great. I mean, that's 100%. Maybe it's not 100% ANCAP in the sense of ANCAP, but it's libertarian / anarchist for sure. It's about the lie of power. That power is just fear, right? And
Yes. Every time he quoted from it, I just wish that it would have gone longer. That was some good writing.
yeah, it rocks. So you have this young idealist, you have a couple grizzled veterans, you have a mole that served loyally in the Empire. One who is a former stormtrooper and one who is a current Imperial land force. I guess he's not a stormtrooper, but he's part of the Imperial Army.
Mm-hmm.
You got the sister of a senator who's the leader, and then you got her. I suppose her.
Yeah, yes, I think they're actually cousins, if I remember correctly.
You're right. Yeah. I think they're cousins. And then you got her, her girlfriend, basically.
Yes.
And she has to wrangle them all, especially because like he's just thrown into this on short notice. Like people, they're outraged. They think it's all gonna go to hell. The guy that set it up basically thought it was gonna go to hell, but somehow they do it. They steal all this money. The sector is crippled, and the Empire goes full Patriot Act on the galaxy, and it can no longer afford basically to let people do whatever, like as long as the wheels are turning, the Empire is not necessarily getting in everyone's business. But now everyone's under surveillance. Everyone can be arrested for nothing. And in fact, Andor is not arrested for stealing 80 million credits. He's arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time because of these laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the brilliance of the rebels in planning for this and succeeding is they anticipated that this would have been the Imperial reaction, and they were counting on it because the populace of the galaxy would have seen the Empire's true colors and what they're capable of.
Yeah, and it's funny. First, do you happen to remember that the guy that the museum curator or whatever his name?
Luthen, the
Yeah, that's right. So it's funny that Mon Mothma, who will later be the face of the Rebel Alliance and its de facto leader for much of the events of the movies and later the expanded universe books. I don't even know if she dies during the course of the books that happen over like 25 years. Maybe she does at some point. But anyway, but she is definitely someone who has anti-imperial feelings, but she is outraged at Luthen's actions. She is not yet on board with the idea of baiting the Empire into making a mistake. Now, maybe she just doesn't get it, like from a strategic perspective. Maybe she's just soft at this point. Well, we see later she starts kind of. She's still part of the struggle. She's trying. She hasn't been scared out of it, but she is very upset that it happened initially. And Luthen, I think Luthen is. Well, I'll say one other thing before I go into Luthen and why he's a great libertarian strategist. But Deirdre knows immediately that this is a bad idea. In fact, I believe she predicts that the Empire will overreact because of it. Like she says, "Oh, we're going to play right into their hand.
mm-hmm.
We're going to do too much, and this is the worst thing that could happen. And all we can do is react that way." It's like, I guess maybe her strategy is to prevent these things before they happen, because once they happen, there's kind of like an inevitable like one-upsmanship that eventually would destroy the Empire.
Right.
Which I think is smart, and I think that's what Luthen believes as well. And her and Luthen are basically on the same page. just on opposite sides.
Right.
But Luthen's ability to kind of play with different factions of the Alliance. I mean, you have Mon Mothma, who's kind of like, she's a moderate. She's not willing to engage in violence. Then you have that exchange with Saw Gerrera,
Yes.
where he's like a true blue neo-Republican. He just wants the Galactic Republic. He loves the Jedi, etc. And balancing him against that Krieger guy that he's talking about, that's basically just a warmed over separatist from the Clone Wars, and which is funny because I think this is a tangent worth going down. The actual Clone Wars is another media that analyzes secession, and obviously, usually from the perspective of the clones fighting the evil droids or the Sith or whatever, right? But the Clone Wars, the TV series, also has the peace faction of the Confederacy of Independent Systems that only ever wanted, they just didn't, they knew the Republic was corrupt, and there's ample evidence in the movies, in the TV shows, that the Galactic Republic was corrupt. I mean, it was a metropole exploiting a periphery. It was a hyper centralized, extremely bureaucratic system. And it wasn't just the Trade Federation, it wasn't just the Techno Union that was seceding, it was thousands of independent star systems. And we see some of these during the Clone Wars, and they're shown as people who generally, they didn't like Republic rule, but they also chafed under Confederacy rule because of the Count Dooku was taking too much power for them too. So they were like, hey, we hate both of you. We want peace so we can secede. We don't want these war measures anymore. Mm-hmm. And the Confederacy actually, the Sith actually thwart a peace talk in Coruscant with literally like a false flag terrorist operation that's pinned on the Confederacy, and then talks break down.
I'm not too familiar with that, at least in recent memory. But yeah, that is an interesting point. I don't know if you've seen A Tale of Two Jedi, but that was another animated, much in the style of Clone Wars series that just also recently came out on Disney Plus. It was sort of a double storyline of Ahsoka growing up, as well as like a flashback, actually, of before when Count Dooku was actually Qui-Gon Jinn's master as a Jedi master, and his sort of fall or seduction into becoming a Sith Lord by Palpatine. If you haven't seen it, it's I would really recommend checking it out. Because
that sounds good. Was it recently made, or was it around the same time of like the Clone Wars?
This was pretty recent, like the past year, I believe. It came out roughly around a little bit after Andor came out.
All right, I'll be sure to see.
Yeah, I don't know if because basically one of the episodes, which I was wanting to kind of break down what happens, but I won't spoil it for you if you don't want me to.
Yeah, I'm fine with spoiling for the audience, but don't spoil it for me yet.
Okay. Yeah, sure. But yeah, it's really good with these themes as well, right? Of libertarianism and secession, and like living in a corrupt sort of society of being inside of the metropole, right?
Yeah, that sounds dope. I mean, I know, the it's funny, and this is kind of well done. The figure of Count Dooku before you meet him in the Attack of the Clones, he's he literally looks like Robert E. Lee. Like he's kind of like this. Oh yeah, he's taking all these systems from the Republic. There's this crisis or whatever, and he was like, and he left the Jedi, and we don't like. I mean, the idea of Count Dooku was like cool. Like they really built him up.
Mm-hmm.
I also think Christopher Lee did an excellent performance at portraying him, despite the fact that the the lines he were given was utter garbage. But yeah, I mean, the lead up to the Separatist crisis is if you actually pay attention to the awful dialogue, it's about the Republic is corrupt. No one likes it. People just want to check out. So you get these people that later, they're kind of everyone. What I'm getting at is Luthen is trying to bring together everyone who is anti-Empire, trying to get them to work together. Later, of course, he betrays the Krieger, but he's not initially trying to do that. What he really wants is for everyone to work together. He's willing to sacrifice Krieger, but only in the cause of the rebellion, which I think is a good place to start talking about. Are the actions by the rebellion in Andor justifiable on libertarian ground? And I want to go to, we had a brief conversation about this in private.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start with that, and we'll go to the Krieger one. So the one thing that kind of rubbed me the wrong way was during the heist to take all the money. They take the governor of the planet hostage, and they say, you need to do what we say, or we'll kill your family. Now, I'm not against the idea that if the mother or even the child tried to run away, that the alliance would be justified in shooting them, because obviously the purpose of running away would be to alert people that are going to come to kill them. So that would be just self-defense. What I think might be a violation of libertarian principles is if we fail or whatever, we'll kill your family or something like that. And that, I think, might be crossing the line of the NEP, because obviously the mother and child could potentially alert authorities, but if they're not doing anything, if they're just standing there, they're not combatants, they're not aggressors. So what do you have to say about that?
Right. I think that's a tough situation, right? I mean, obviously you've signed up to do something that's very, very potentially hazardous, and a lot of things can and do often go wrong in these situations. Well, yeah, I don't really know if I have a good answer for this. I think, and I mentioned this a little before, that it would be one thing to deceive the governor into thinking that to comply, and just not actually have done it. And it's another issue if you're actually like willing to do that. Yeah, I don't know. It's like obviously I've never been in a situation like that. But I think that if you, and this goes like obviously beyond the context of just Star Wars. But if you have a weapon, you have to be prepared to use it, right? Otherwise, why do you have it? and you just have to really be in that sort of mental space, and you have to have answered the question beforehand, right?
Yes, I remember when we were talking privately, you said it was most likely a bluff. Although you also said it depends on the member of the squad, right? You thought that
I
the
thought
girl
that,
the
yeah,
girlfriend of the leader did have kind of like revolutionary fervor enough to execute that, but that other members might not have.
yeah, I think Andor probably wouldn't have, and pretty much it was just, I would say, the girlfriend and also the one guy that was like really sort of like butting heads a lot with Andor.
The guy that
The,
eventually betrayed him, or the
yeah,
former. Yeah,
the betrayer.
yeah, I could see him killing him.
Yeah, because he definitely has in one of the other episodes he mentioned to Andor that he has certainly had his fair share of being wronged by the Empire in the past. So this might have, yeah, I feel pretty confident in saying that he would be in that category.
Yeah. Well, that question I think is a good lead into, I think, what will be our final main point I want to touch on, which is in the same way that The Expanse and Firefly were or were not successful in convincing the viewer of the reality of secession, sorry. Um, what do you think is the how successful do you think Andor was in convincing the average viewer of the necessity of revolutionary violence? And not to say in their personal situation, but maybe in general, whether Mon Mothma's plan or whether Luthen's plan was the more realistic of the two.
Well, I think it does a really good job of introducing that idea to a wider audience. Sort of like giving, like putting an eyedropper to the tongue and letting them get that first taste of the flavor, right? But in and of itself is not going to be sufficient to really take said wider audience all the way across the finish line and, getting these ideas fully developed in their minds. So in a way I would say it did a better job, debatably, potentially, than Firefly or The Expanse. Firefly was a bit of a cult type of cult hit, cult following, and certainly has very high praises from those who have seen it, myself included, but didn't really have, unfortunately, as wide of a reach. The Expanse, of course, had somewhat better of a reach, but not really. Like, you can't really debate versus a Star Wars show, right? So I think that it does really good at the audience and just introducing these ideas, but of course we'll need more more of it to really drive it home.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, Andor was a lot more talked about than all the other shows probably combined. And that's good. It's obviously all these things. I don't want to downplay. Like, just because media is not going to be like just going to swoop in and save us. But the fact that people are talking about these kinds of things is important and is a step in the right direction. Yeah, if I met the creator of Andor, I'd shake his hand. And
I totally agree with that.
And Rogue One as well. I don't know if the same creator, probably not. But it's part of the same series. There is kind of a more all three trilogies of Star Wars and any of the spin-offs are generally focused on Jedi and heroes, and Rogue One and Andor. Now the Mandalorian Boba Fett stuff, I mean, it's sort of its own separate thing. I mean, those are like cool guys who live by a code, which granted, I think is cool. Not necessarily that libertarian. The Andor and Rogue One are about people who hate and want to destroy an evil empire and are willing to sacrifice their lives to do it. And they're not heroes, they're just regular guys,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I those two things, one series, one movie, that I think is the best that Star Wars has to offer, if I have to be honest.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very fair statement to make.
Do you have any other thoughts to conclude?
Well, very excited for second season of Andor, and really just any show or work of fiction that highlights the need or necessity for a revolution against an oppressive authority. That stuff I'm a fan of.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth ending this not with our usual "May a Thousand Flowers Bloom," but I think reading out Nemec's manifesto might be
Ooh.
good, yeah, ending to this. So there will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this: freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions, that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then, remember this: the imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know the day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority. And then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try